It lays the predicate and the foundation for the development of a weather satellite that will permit man to determine the world's cloud layer and ultimately to control the weather, and he who controls the weather will control the world.
In this broadcast, geoengineering operations are diminishing and dispersing natural cloud formations and cloud cover, replacing it with a solar radiation management haze. Not opinion. The geoengineering denying so-called climate science community has now conclusively confirmed the planet's natural cloud cover is diminishing rapidly. Where will this trajectory take us? I'll get to that. More crop collapse reports from this week. Desertification is accelerating at blinding speed around the world. Weather and temperature whiplash is off the charts. And no, it's not nature. Life expectancy in the U.S. plummets further. Data centers and AI are gorging on grid power. What's the breaking point? When will the lights go out for good? Do you really want to know? Scientists just called, quote, mirror life microbe research an unprecedented threat to life on Earth. I'll do my best to cover these stories and more in this week's installment of the Bad News broadcast. This is Dane Wigington with geoengineeringwatch.org. Let's start with this from Sigma Earth. Decline in low-altitude clouds tied to 2023's record heat, lowering Earth's reflectivity, that's Earth's albedo. They say to 80-year low. No, not to 80-year low, to the lowest in the history of the human race, and likely much longer than that. Continuing with the study, the gravity of this specific threat can't be overstated. Geoengineering operations are core to this equation. The report states this loss has resulted in a measurable fall in planetary albedo, again, planetary reflectivity, what blocks the sun's incoming thermal energy, the fraction of solar energy that is reflected into space, which is accelerating surface warming. The report continues. The continuous loss in planetary albedo raises concerns about rapid warming. We're in a runaway event right now. Climate engineering is making it far worse, not better. In the attempt to mask what's unfolding from the population until the last possible moment, they are pounding the final nails into our collective coffins. If we don't stop what's happening in our skies, nothing else will matter soon. The findings, the report says, emphasize the necessity of addressing anthropogenic influences on climate. Specifically, they say emissions and aerosol concentrations to prevent the cascade effects of warming. Aerosol concentrations, that's exactly what SRM does. Putting light scattering aerosols, heat scattering aerosols into the atmosphere, which trap more heat than they deflect, destroy the ozone layer, disrupt the hydrological cycle, and contaminate the entire planet along with every breath we take. Final excerpt from this report. Managing these dynamics will become increasingly important, they say, in global climate mitigation efforts as the world approaches critical temperature thresholds. If only that last statement from Sigma Earth was true, but it isn't. We're not just approaching critical temperature thresholds, they're in the rearview mirror. We're through the guardrail, with climate engineering again at the top of the endless list of planetary decimating human activities, decimating natural cloud cover in exchange for a toxic chemical particulate canopy. What could go wrong? We're all about to find out the hard way. In regard to the converging extremely near-term existential threats, an important reminder of this very recent report. Quote, an existential threat affecting billions. 3/4 of Earth's land became permanently drier in the last 3 decades. That's from livescience.com. Again, this is a reminder. The threat posed by what this report cites can't be overstated. And for the record, based on the laws of physics, this global drying, and we also have, remember, global dimming and global stilling, because climate engineering is affecting convection, which affects surface wind speeds. So we have all or nothing scenario. It's either blowing ferociously or not at all. And this global drying can't happen on a warming planet unless there's a factor that's being held back from the public. That factor is geoengineering, solar radiation management, stratospheric aerosol injection. The atmosphere holds 7% more moisture for every degree C of warming. It must rain more overall on a warming planet, not less. Again, unless there's a factor we're not being told about. And so there is. Yes, there are constant record-shattering deluges now, but even more record-shattering droughts. The Amazon is one prime example. The Amazon is literally drying up and burning to the ground. Lungs of the planet burning to the ground. No coverage on matrix media while they're showing us political theater day in and day out, endlessly. Again, to summarize, record drought and record deluge scenarios, both hallmarks of climate engineering operations. For our new listeners, we're officially told what we're seeing in our skies are condensation trails, which they are not. Not jet exhaust, as even some online self-proclaimed truth-tellers want you to believe. The lingering, spreading trails that so commonly fill skylines with a dirty, dingy filth are in fact jet aircraft dispersions of climate engineering elements. Geoengineeringwatch.org has conclusively proven this on film and on the record, all meticulously documented in our groundbreaking climate engineering documentary titled The Dimming, available for free on the homepage of geoengineeringwatch.org. Even at this late hour, so few have any true comprehension of what's unfolding by the day. Even worse, almost none care or have any desire to know. But for those that have summoned the courage to face the gathering storm head on, my deepest respect and regard to you. And I know you know how deeply troubling it is to inhabit a planet in which the vast majority don't have or want a clue, though they'll soon learn denial doesn't alter reality. Please forgive my rant. I'm almost done. But when you live this battle 7 days a week, nonstop for over 20 years, it's hard not to rant. How bad's it going to get and how soon? Let's start with this. Yet more acknowledgement of what I and geoengineeringwatch.org have tried to warn about for a decade and a half. Climate engineering operations are the greatest and most immediate threat we face on many levels, short of nuclear cataclysm, which, for the record, the clinically insane controllers now also see as a potential way to slow down the warming of the planet. Fill the skies with nuclear fallout from a nuclear exchange to block the sun. What a great idea. Yes, they are that insane. If any nuclear exchange occurs, the ionizing radiation will strip away what little is left of the ozone layer. Game over, not to mention the rest of the contamination. And the fact that the subsequent societal collapse would trigger another 442 nuclear catastrophes as nuclear power generation facilities around the globe go into total meltdown. Welcome to the asylum. Again, about geoengineering filling the skies with toxic aerosol filth, which is and has been diminishing the planet's natural cloud producing processes. Low-level cumulus clouds, the spellbindingly beautiful kind that actually do cool the planet. If this trajectory is allowed to continue, it will very soon be game over, as I have desperately tried to warn about for so many years. And this isn't an opinion, it's a mathematically statistical fact, a certainty. Of course, governments around the world are actively and passively participating in geoengineering operations. Does anyone actually believe they would ask for our permission before deploying this? Do they ever ask our permission for anything? Did they ask our permission to detonate 2,400 nuclear bombs around the world, some of which they thought could collapse the entire atmosphere, but they did it anyway? Project Starfish Prime and Project Fishbowl, there's so many more. Unbridled insanity. It's all about power and control in the end. It always has been. And those who print the money are the ones who control the narrative and everything else. Moving on from NBC News. Why has it been even hotter than expected recently? ? Research points to diminishing cloud cover. Global temperatures, the report says, in the last 2 years have been higher than scientists anticipated. That may be, the report says, because cloud cover has decreased, a study suggests. This is so absurd. It may be because of that. With decreased clouds, it might get hotter. This is the science community. This is the so-called experts that we're told to regard and revere and never to question. They don't have a clue. Again, it's like saying if you jump off a 100-story building, you may be injured when you hit the sidewalk at terminal velocity. Final excerpt from the report. Last year was the hottest in recorded history, and through summer 2024, the pace was to be the warmest year in 2024. For the record, 2024 has already been declared the hottest year on record in spite of the chemical cool downs, and the year isn't even over yet, and they already know there's no chance it won't be the hottest year. And they're chemically cooling everything they can, everywhere they can. These are patented processes. Please search the Engineering Winter section on the homepage of geoengineeringwatch.org. Let's press on. From azernews.as, scientists uncover another factor in dramatic acceleration of climate change: loss of natural cloud cover, aka loss of reflectivity. The very problem that solar radiation management claims to cure, it's actually making exponentially worse. What a surprise. More headlines on this dire threat in a moment. This is Dane Wigington. You're listening to the weekly installment of the commercial-free, non-political Global Alert News Report, the End of the World as We Know It broadcast, brought to you by Geoengineeringwatch.org, the largest and most visited website in the world on the subject of global climate engineering operations, aka weather warfare. Reaching a critical mass of awareness is the only way forward in this fight, and I bring this up every week so that it might be better understood that if we could reach this critical mass, so many wheels would turn on their own in this battle as individuals in every arena that are in positions to help, if they understood that they are literally fighting for their lives. The fur will fly if we can fully expose this issue, and that effort will take all of us. We can and we must reach this critical mass. Start a conversation on climate engineering that leads people to a credible source of data. Start a spot fire of awareness, and if we start enough of those spot fires and we tell others to do the same, and they merge into a blaze that can't be put out, we've reached a critical mass, and then the paradigm will change. I'm not saying our problems are over, anything but we will have taken a quantum leap in the right direction, and that's worth fighting for. Geoengineering Watch will continue all of our efforts to be the go-to source on covert climate engineering operations. A conversation on climate engineering can easily be started with Geoengineering Watch awareness-raising materials available on our homepage. Our only mission in making those materials available, which we make our printed materials available for less than our cost of producing and shipping. Our mission, again, to stop the insanity in our skies. Please help us to sound the alarm. From ASEANnow.com, the cloud factor, how vanishing low clouds are amplifying planetary warming. Why isn't the so-called climate science community on Matrix Media announcing this? Why aren't they connecting the climate engineering factor, which they systematically omit? And there is no legitimate discussion about climate, anything from any perspective, without first and foremost addressing climate engineering operations, and no legitimate discussion about climate engineering without addressing chemical ice nucleation cloud seeding cooldowns. Why is Geoengineeringwatch.org the only source that I know of that's addressing that core part of climate engineering? Engineered winter. Next, from newscientist.com. Extreme heat may rapidly sap the ocean's ability to absorb CO2. And yes, this is a double-edged sword, because the oceans have already absorbed too much CO2. They're acidifying. Many organisms are dying because of that. But now it's building up in the atmosphere, which is also a problem. And yes, it is a problem. You can't just change atmospheric chemistry and expect organisms to adapt in the blink of an eye. Not going to happen. We have increased atmospheric CO2 by 50%. That's triggered many other feedback loops. And that's where the problem truly manifests. And people look at this far too simplistically. They think CO2 is necessary, so more is better. No. Water is necessary. Go a foot under for a few minutes and see how long you last. Put your crops a foot underwater. See how well they do. Balance is the key. And this equilibrium on the planet that has allowed us to exist and thrive here has now been obliterated. The climate's energy balance has been completely obliterated. And about the CO2 and about the heat buildup, much of which is from diminished cloud cover, ozone layer destruction, which is not hairspray cans. CFCs are a problem, but a small problem compared to climate engineering. The ozone destroying particulates they disperse, and the frequency transmissions that further manifest the problem. Diminished ozone layer means dying plankton, and yes, there's many sources of damage to global plankton populations, but none in the category of destroyed ozone layer, intense UV radiation, penetrating the surface of the oceans where the plankton have to feed in the upper layers of the water column, slaughtering plankton. Plankton populations in the Atlantic, we now know from recent peer-reviewed study, down 90%. 90%. Other oceans not far behind, no plankton, no people. That's a simple equation. And once the plankton are gone, there's even more cloud cover loss. Another feedback loop, because plankton emits substances which create the marine layer or enhance the marine layer. Everything is connected. Once you start the dominoes falling, they all trigger other chains of dominoes, and that's exactly where we're at. It's called cascading collapse. The ocean carbon sink, the report states, which removes about a quarter of our emissions from the atmosphere each year, was much weaker than expected in 2023. They just didn't know. They just couldn't figure it out. We knew at geoengineeringwatch.org, and we've been shouting from the rooftop for 15 years, and the so-called climate science community just didn't know. Question, are corporate matrix media sources beginning to disclose the truth because they're so honest and moral? Definitely not. Such sources are finally alluding to reality because it can no longer be hidden, because impact at full velocity is now imminent. But the weather terrorists will continue to double down in the attempt to mask the severity and immediacy of what's unfolding until the moment of impact. You can count on that. And with that in mind, patented processes of chemical ice nucleation cloud seeding, their tool of choice to create the sensationalized headlines that are used to continue fueling confusion and division in the population in regard to the true extent of damage done to the biosphere. On that note, from National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, record-breaking lake effect snow arrives as winter starts. They say Cattaraugus, I'm not saying that correctly, a town in New York, racked up the highest snowfall totaling over 6 feet. Really? Has anyone ever heard of this place? Anyone? Pile up the chemical frozen so-called snow and sensationalize it to the point that the population believes that there's a ferocious winter unfolding, when in fact climate engineering, aka winter weather warfare, is at the core. From the Weather Channel Climate Engineering Cover-Up Corporation, why is Lake Superior full of icy snowballs? Question mark. Report says recent plunging temperatures have led to a rare phenomenon along Wisconsin's shores of Lake Superior. Here's what happened. The Weather Channel Climate Engineering Cover-Up actors then commence with non-stop deception, covering the tracks of the climate engineers and chemical ice nucleation. Do an online search of Lake Michigan ice balls. Look at the images and know it isn't a natural phenomenon. This is happening on shores of the Arctic, the Baltic. You have to see the pictures to believe it. And please search the engineering winter section on the homepage of geoengineeringwatch.org. There are many, many more photos there. It will astound you at what you haven't seen and what you're told is something natural from all these corporations and those who serve them, whose task it is to cover the tracks of the climate engineers, and that's exactly what they're doing. About the Great Lakes. They're being used by the climate engineers as a source of moisture for what amounts to a massive engineered snow-blowing mechanism. The lakes are at record high temperatures. Imagine that. Also from National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, Great Lakes experience record warm water temperatures heading into winter. How many Americans know that? Or the people living under the lake effect snow along the shorelines that's been chemically nucleated in spite of the record warm lake water temperatures. Engineering winter from warmth. Welcome to climate engineering. Again, please check the engineering winter section on the homepage of geoengineeringwatch.org to learn so much more. All forms of wildlife continue to diminish rapidly, from birds to elephants to caribou and everything in between. Chemical ice nucleation and the flash freezes it creates are a major piece of the puzzle. In the Arctic, many of the herd animals can't scratch through this rock-hard frozen surface that's created by this process. We've seen images of waterfowl in lakes, hundreds of them on some occasions, frozen solid into the ice. Happened instantly, nearly instantly, as these materials hit the surface. If you don't know about chemical ice nucleation, again, think of your first aid kit that can sit on a shelf at room temperature for decades, and you mix the cold pack together, you have ice instantly. It's that process on an unimaginably massive scale. How is this not weather warfare? That's exactly what it is. Agricultural regions being targeted as well. Earlier this week, from the UK Daily Mail, urgent warning to 8 U.S. states as bomb cyclone, a term we hear all the time now, don't we, is expected to cause hurricane-like conditions again, all or nothing wind scenarios. This report states, meteorologists predict that states from Maine to New York will see the worst impacts with dangerous flooding and widespread power outages predicted, aka scheduled. The supercharged storm, they say, will bring wind gusts of up to 60 miles per hour, as well as torrential rainfall of 8 inches in places, which will be amplified by an atmospheric river stretching 2,000 miles along the coast. They continue. The East Coast has been hit with unseasonably high temperatures this week, with New York City topping 61 degrees on Wednesday, 30 degrees above the December average. That depends on the part of New York, which they didn't state here. Next, more from the Weather Channel, Climate Engineering Cover-Up Corporation. Warmer air on the way to northeast, but to be accompanied by rain, ice, and snow. Does all that fit together? Let's keep going. Cold that has been around since after Thanksgiving is set to ease in the northeast, but AccuWeather forecasters, script readers, say that the warm-up will come with rain and the threat of wintry precipitation will not completely go away. Stop. No, it won't go away because the climate engineers will, of course, continue their chemical ice nucleation operations. The Weather Channel report continues, as the moist, warm air overrides the entrenched cold air at the surface, there will be a threat for freezing rain and icy conditions. Residual cold air, they say, at the low levels could cause some of the rain to freeze on surfaces even if temperatures are slightly above freezing. This is total climate engineering cover-up. Make it up as they go. The constant freezing fog and freezing rain is inseparable from patented processes of chemical ice nucleation cloud seeding. This flow of moisture is coming straight from the record-warm Gulf of Mexico, and they're chemically nucleating this moisture, and sometimes it hits the surface before it sets up, and that's exactly what's happening. It's mind-numbing, the kind of deception that's going on at these so-called weather forecasting agencies. They're nothing but climate engineering cover-up entities. Here's a question. Once the population is finally completely awakened to what's been done to them by governments around the globe without their knowledge or consent, and to the agencies like the Weather Channel, Weather Central, Weather Nation, there's many more, all of them owned by core components of the power structure, by the way. But for all those who have participated within these organizations of deceiving the population, wouldn't we think that the population, again, once they're finally fully awake and aware, wouldn't they hold these criminal accomplices to the cover-up of climate engineering legally and morally accountable? Maybe we'll find out soon. Chemical nucleation of zonal flows of unorganized moisture into the northwestern U.S. They're allowing this moisture to drift in. They scatter it with frequency transmissions, which have a repelling effect on that moisture. It's heavily seeded, so we have days of either featureless skies, often very still underneath, maybe occasional major gusts of wind, then it dies off again, freezing rain, extremely cold surface temperatures. We have conditions where it's raining at 30 degrees and frozen precipitation falls at 40 and 50 degrees at times. This isn't right. This isn't nature. What will it take to wake people up? Of course this is going on. Let's continue from so-called AccuWeather. What is the snow forecast this winter for the U.S.? Question mark. Report says the first week of December was not a preview of the entire winter season, as forecasters say some twists and turns are expected in the coming months, including a potential visit from the polar vortex. Listen carefully, because this is the scheduled weather script by the climate engineering cover-up criminals. The AccuWeather report continues. The weather pattern across the country will flip around the middle of December. How would they know this? And that's exactly what happens. They don't have enough resources or capability to cool the entire country often at once. It's either one side record warm, even in winter, and the other side flash freeze, and then the pendulum swings back and forth. And this is exactly what they're alluding here to. The country will flip around the middle of December, opening the door for mild air to thaw areas of the central and eastern U.S. that had early season snow. Meanwhile, they say rain and mountain snow will return to the west as storms from the Pacific roll through the region. Again, completely different from historical storms here. I'm speaking firsthand. It's like a completely different planet. We have these days of constant drip and drizzle, freezing drip and drizzle. Temperature doesn't move sometimes all day and all night, or if it breaks and the chemically nucleated mess stops, the temperatures rebound 20 degrees very quickly. That's what we have now. Everything is dying here. The entire forest is dying. Every fir tree on my mountain is dead or dying. This can't continue. It won't continue. You can quote me on that. They say, quote, "We are favoring heavier rain and snow in the Pacific Northwest and occasionally Northern California." That's AccuWeather long-range expert, Paul Pastelok. He's a script reader. That's all he is. Raytheon and Lockheed Martin do the weather modeling for the nation's weathermen, National Weather Service and NOAA, and that script is passed all the way down to the local meteorologist, National Weather Service and NOAA, with illegal federal gag orders on them. But when it comes down to the local meteorologists or those who serve all the other climate engineering cover-up entities, they're simply protecting their paychecks and pensions because they don't have an ounce of courage, or they would face this issue. Hiding in your cabin on the Titanic will not save you. How many people in the human race, the Milgram experiments exposed that, didn't they? If you don't know what the Milgram experiments are, take a look. And it is dismally pathetic to state that 90% of the human race will do whatever they're told, including injure an innocent person. That's what the experiments proved, if they believe someone in authority is telling them to do it. That is an incredibly pitiful acknowledgement of human nature. It needs to change or we won't be here long. The report then says a turbulent pattern may unfold during the week of Christmas. And again, snow is nothing like what it was in the past. It's a completely different composition for those that are old enough to remember. Drought will continue, they say, across the interior southwest and southeastern plains as storms tend to stay north of this region for most of the winter. That's again from Pastelok. How does he know? Because he's reading a script of the scheduled weather, but the script could change. Keep that in mind. Farther east, the return of mild air will lead to a January thaw, which may help ease heating bills at the expense of worsening conditions. Think it, these guys can't predict hours in advance, and he knows what's going to happen well into the first of the year? Really? He says when cold air does chill the Midwest and Appalachians, resorts may need to rely on making artificial snow to keep the slopes open. Good luck with that for much longer. He continues, Florida will be a nice vacation spot this winter with less than average rain and above average temperatures. Again, that's from Pastelok with AccuWeather. He continues, while it is expected to be warm along the Gulf Coast and into the Tennessee Valley in late January, severe weather may occasionally rumble across the region, feeding off the mild air and moisture from the Gulf of Mexico, which is where our winter storms come from, by the way, now. They feed moisture up from the record-warm Gulf of Mexico, and as it's circling counterclockwise around a low-pressure area, they're chemically nucleating it. And on the backside, you have, quote, the cold side of the storm. You have a warm side to a winter storm and a cold side to a winter storm, and people accept this as normal. And the snow often starts falling at far above normal temperatures, far above freezing temperatures. It eventually cools down because this chemical concoction is extremely cold to the touch. With that in mind, the AccuWeather report continues. February freeze, ? Snow, frigid air to return before winter's end, they say. They seem sure of that. The pattern gets interesting, they say, in late January and February. A storm track from the south central plains combining with a far northern storm track comes together in the Ohio and Tennessee valleys. How could they possibly predict something like this, to produce some snow and ice from this region into the Northeast? Anybody notice that the snow sometimes is extremely sparse, scattered, nothing like historical norms, because they're spreading that moisture over the widest possible area, and the chemical nucleation process, the endothermic reaction it causes, dries up much of that moisture. That's why we have coast-to-coast drought. Every state, some level of drought in some part of that state. Think about that. That's not normal, and it's not nature. They say the uptick in snowstorms could make February the snowiest part of the winter for some areas of the east, especially where there was no lake effect snow or snow squalls during the opening week of December. They are truly desperate. Climate engineers are truly desperate as the wheels come off the proverbial bus. Climate is blowing apart. Many causes. Please don't blame everything on just climate engineering. It's a this and that equation. We've been absolutely horrific stewards of the planet. Everything the human race does that affects the energy balance of the planet is a part of the problem. Please don't forget that. If you try to claim climate engineering is the only problem, you will lose 2/3 of the people we need in this battle to help us, who know better, who know that you can't do what we've done to the planet on 100 other fronts and not have repercussions. Climate engineering is the single most destructive factor, but by no means the only factor, again, of this and that equation. Credibility is key if we're going to move this fight forward. All the above. Well, if the Weather Channel's Paul Pastelok predicted it all, it must be natural, right? Not so much. Then there is the polar vortex, they say, at risk in February, especially late February, that could extend our winter this year into early spring. Pastelok added, if this unfolds, the polar vortex could unleash some of the coldest air of the season during the final month. This is all schedule weather. I don't have the words for these people, how they look themselves in the mirror, how they look their children in the eye. Don't have the words. I hope they are presented with a link to the dimming and asked why they are avoiding this core part of weather everything. And let's not forget the firestorms, just so I don't skip over this. A sample of the latest in that arena from numerous sources. Celebrities among thousands fleeing Malibu wildfires. Question, how many of the celebs will take the time to investigate the core causal factor that is key to their current dilemma? Could sending them a link to the dimming documentary start a spot fire of awareness? Only one way to find out. Moving on from Esquire.com. Quote, we should listen to the climate scientists while we still have a chance. They say a new report out of the Arctic sparks concern. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration Arctic report card shows how climate change is scrambling ecosystems and shape-shifting the landscape in part of the planet where global warming is most intense. Again, there is no legitimate discussion of climate anything from any perspective without first and foremost addressing climate engineering and chemical ice nucleation operations, period. For the record, the permafrost region contains about twice as much carbon as is in the atmosphere now, and about 3 times as much carbon as is in the above-ground biomass of all the world's forests, which already are carbon sources, not carbon sinks. That includes the Amazon boreal forest, the Arctic, all now carbon sources, not carbon sinks. That means the planet's primary life support systems are failing, not going to fail, not could, may, might fail, are failing. On that note, for the record, on December 10th of this week, Arctic sea ice extent hit a new record low, beating the previous record low set in 2016. Over 155,000 square kilometers lower. And also, keep this in mind, Arctic ice extent means the surface area, not the volume. So the so-called official agencies are now considering any area of the Arctic Ocean that's 15% slush or more is considered ice pack. That's still 85% ocean. How do you consider that ice pack? That's the kind of deception they use to mask the totality of what's unfolding. And in regard to the Arctic ice mass, the volume, which is all that matters, the mass has long since been at record lows. Please take the time to view the film Chasing Ice, non-political. You can find it online. If you don't believe what you see with your own eyes, nothing I can tell you. So much for the global cooling and coming ice age false narratives. Both are exactly what the controllers and the climate engineers want alt media sources to parrot. Chemical ice nucleation, cloud seeding operations, and the flash freeze conditions they create at the ground level. This is a core component of climate engineering and of the confusion that the climate engineers are trying to seed in the population. From newscientist.com, melting permafrost makes, quote, drunken forests store less carbon. If you haven't seen this, take a look at the photos. Trees jackstrawed in every possible direction because the ground is literally melting underneath them. The report says as the Arctic ground thaws due to climate change, climate engineering again making it worse, not better. Trees are struggling to stay upright, and this slows their growth and makes them store less carbon. They're carbon sources now. Pressing on, here's an update on the latest idiocracy from the so-called climate science community. This is from CNN, although I've covered this on a previous broadcast. This is from their climate solutions section. A controversial plan to refreeze the Arctic is seeing promising results, but scientists warn of big risk. This is the let's drill holes in the ice, put gas pumps on the ice, pump water through the ice, and hope it refreezes, and not consider the fact that warmer water will replace that water from underneath the ice, which will further thaw the methane on the seabed, which will further speed up the warming. It's all so moronic, I have no words for it. And then there's, of course, other things I've made mention for unbridled idiocracy, science suggestions, space mirrors, tarps to cover the polar regions. We're going to cover the North and South Pole with reflective tarps. Really? Brazil's sized balloons in space and ice curtains below glaciers around the whole of Antarctica. It's beyond moronic. And now there's this. Can 500,000 drones stop 3 major tipping points? Question mark. Here's this suggestion. Building 500,000 autonomous undersea drone subs that cruise around the polar regions, drilling holes in the ice and then pumping water through the ice with what energy source they don't bother to even consider. These people have degrees? Degrees in what? Idiocracy? Again, from power structure institutions of total programming. They have their certificates of indoctrinations. We live in an absolute planetary asylum. Pressing on, more on the meltdown. This is from phys.org. The melting of Greenland, a climate challenge with major implications for the 21st century. Greenland's glaciers are melting at an alarming rate. That's a gross understatement. They're imploding. From BBC, the danger of a runaway ice albedo loop. Antarctic researchers are warning of a runaway ice albedo feedback loop, but what is it? When you lose the reflective ice, then the thermal energy from the sun is absorbed. For example, in the case of sea ice, it reflects 90% of the sun's incoming thermal energy. Once that's gone, the dark ocean absorbs 90% of the thermal energy. That rapidly warms the ocean. As that reaches the seafloor, formerly frozen methane deposits continue to thaw and release, migrating through the water column to the surface and then into the atmosphere, spreading out, covering the planet like a layer of glass, trapping even more heat, causing even more melting, even more methane release. These are feedback loops, and there's about 50 in process right now. We're in a cascading collapse scenario on track for what is known scientifically as Venus syndrome. Search geoengineeringwatch.org Venus syndrome and learn more about that not-so-fun scenario. Let's press on. Antarctic researchers warn of possible catastrophic sea level rise. That's from ABC News. It's not possible, it's imminent at this point. From phys.org, study finds Arctic warming tied to severe cold spells in UK. Again, climate engineering cover-up, period. Chemical ice nucleation is inseparable from these equations. Whatever else is a part of them, you can't discuss them legitimately without first and foremost addressing climate engineering and chemical ice nucleation cloud seeding. From newscientist.com, Antarctica is in crisis and we're scrambling to understand its future. From that report, the last 2 years have seen unprecedented falls in the level of sea ice around Antarctica, which serves as a protective wall for the continent's huge ice sheets. Researchers are now racing to understand the global impact of what could happen next. Is that hard to figure out? If the buttresses for the land ice melt and the land ice slides into the sea, displacing seawater, and the loss of that ice off the landmass, by the way, creates another feedback called glacial rebound. As you lift the incalculable weight of that ice off the landmass, it's already happening in Greenland. The landmass begins to rise up out of the ocean. That displaces even more sea level. Everything feeds on itself. It's all happening right now. Final excerpt from this newscientist.com report. Antarctic sea ice has declined precipitously since 2014. In July of 2023, it exceeded a 7 sigma event. For the record, a 7 sigma event would mathematically only be expected to happen once every 1.07 billion years. Consider that. No, it's not some cyclical pattern. That's a statistical impossibility. It is directly and completely related to human activity, with climate engineering being at the top of the equation, but not the only factor. I want to stress that. Too many people are stuck in that position, blaming everything on climate engineering. That is simply to lose credibility. From contextnews.com, as marine heat waves intensify, fishermen hunt far and wide. That's because everything's dying, because the oceans are superheating. From UNESCO, warming waters could endanger all fish in tropical and subtropical regions, warns scientist. Rising global temperatures could have devastating consequences. Not could, not may, not might. Already have and will continue to. It's called Canfield Ocean. Look that one up. For marine ecosystems, particularly in tropical and subtropical regions, researchers predict that up to all fish species in these areas may surpass their thermal tolerance limits under the most severe climate. It's a given. It's a given at this point. You can't stop this kind of thermal inertia. We are headed for a planet that will not support life. More headlines from extremetempstatus.com. Extraordinary heat in Oceania. Tropical Pacific islands are experiencing unprecedented heat, destroying all records. From grist.org. The night shift. With extreme heat making it perilous to work during the day, farmers and fishermen worldwide are adapting to overnight hours. Think about that. Shouldn't people be alarmed to the core if they have to work at night to keep out of the scorching sun? Moving on, same theme as mentioned earlier in this broadcast. This is an ongoing dilemma from dwnews.com. That's a German source, by the way. Why fertile land is turning into desert. 4 football fields of land degrade into desert every second. Think about that. The report continues. Nearly 1/2 of the planet's landmass is on the brink of turning into non-arable desert, according to the United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification. These already arid lands are marked by low rainfall, yet support 45% of the world's agriculture, not for much longer. The report continues. Now, extreme drought linked to human-made global heating, climate engineering, single greatest drought-causing factor, period. Please search the engineering drought section on the homepage of geoengineeringwatch.org. The report continues, is helping to transform this area into an infertile wasteland. Climate engineering not only causing drought, but sterilizing soils with the toxic elements that are coming down through our air column and our precipitation. Final excerpt from this report, severe land degradation and desertification are impacting the Earth's ability to support environmental and human well-being. Degraded land can no longer support diverse ecosystems or help regulate climate, water flows, and the production of nutrients vital for life on the planet. Translation, game over. On that sobering note, you're listening to the weekly installment of Global Alert News, the Bad News Broadcast, installment number 488, December 14th, 2024. This is Dane Wigington, your host. Global Alert News is brought to you by Geoengineeringwatch.org, the largest and most visited website in the world on the subject of climate intervention operations known as geoengineering. Recordings of the commercial-free, non-political Global Alert News broadcast can be found on the homepage of Geoengineeringwatch.org under the recent column and under the Dane Wigington YouTube channel. My deepest gratitude to all those that are marching forward in this fight. Again, our collective efforts, that's what can still make a difference at this late hour. If you're on our email list, please put us on your email contact book so that our mailouts don't go to the spam files. Please help us to share the groundbreaking documentary, The Dimming, which fully exposes the climate engineering atrocities. The best way to share is by circulating the direct link to The Dimming by email directly from the homepage of geoengineeringwatch.org. Sharing directly helps us to overcome social media censorship. Speaking of which, you can find The Dimming on our Rumble channel as well. You have a choice. When viewing our YouTube of The Dimming or Global Alert News or any other Geoengineering Watch video on YouTube, please subscribe, share, and comment, all of which helps us to circulate critically important data to a much wider audience. How do we reach those that still are not looking up? By starting a conversation with Geoengineering Watch awareness-raising materials. They can be found on our homepage. Our only goal, to provide activists what they need to move this fight forward as fast as possible. Extremely high-quality printed materials, shocking images, excellent key to the door for waking people up, pictures worth 1,000 words. We have new Geoengineering Watch hoodies, new shirts. Photos of both are on our homepage. Scannable business cards, bumper stickers, all effective tools to help strike up a conversation on the climate engineering issue. We pass on our printed materials for less than our cost of producing and shipping. We must stop what's happening in our skies or all other causes and concerns become moot. Reaching a critical mass again, only way forward in this fight. It is the great imperative. If we can expose it, we can stop it from the inside out by awakening the families of those participating so that they know they're participating in their own demise. If you're willing to share a picture of yourself with a Geoengineering Watch shirt or hoodie, ideally in some crowded location, please send your photo to us so we can post it as part of our activist compilation, which is now part of our materials page. The images do encourage others to make their voices heard in this all-important battle to sound the alarm. To all those that are steadfastly committed to exposing and halting this insanity in our skies, my deepest gratitude to you forever. Moving on, the headline of Deception from Futurism.com. Here it is. Climate engineering, bold solution or dangerous gamble? Question mark. They say climate engineering is a double-edged sword. While it offers innovative solutions to mitigate climate change, really, is that a solution to put jet aircraft in the air all over the world, spewing out toxic nanoparticles that contaminate virtually everything, destroy the ozone layer, disrupt the hydrological cycle? And that's innovative solutions? They say it poses significant risks that require careful consideration. Too late for that. Over 75 years too late. So often, and from so many sources, we hear about how bad things could get if the planet's average temperatures exceed a rise of 1.5 degrees C over pre-industrial baselines. Way too late for that. Based on unfiltered frontline temperature data and accurate baselines, we are 3.5 degrees C past that already, now. We're warned about how destructive the weather will become. We're warned about how many forests will burn. We're warned about how many forms of animals, plants, and insects will go extinct. And all of this as if such a crossroad has yet to be crossed, which is a blatant, glaring, and ultimately lethal lie. More headlines from newscientist.com. Heat waves are surpassing the extremes predicted by climate models. Let's translate that. It's way worse than we thought. That's exactly what we hear now, week after week after week, from the so-called climate science community. We knew at geoengineeringwatch.org how bad it was. How come they didn't know? Next, from intermountainfarmandranch.com, climate change will cost Montana agriculture more than 9,000 job losses, 181 million, report says. For the record, that's just the beginning. And again, of course, no mention of climate engineering operations, which are the most core factor in this equation. From MSN, squeezed by climate change, Florida's orange juice crop sees massive decline. Their words, not mine. Moving on, more headlines from ABC News. Ocean salt water entering Delaware River due to drought and sea level rise. Water managers say drinking water is not yet impacted, but officials are taking urgent measures. They would never tell you when it is until people start reporting it on their own. The Atlantic Ocean is creeping into the Delaware River Basin, a major source of drinking water for Philadelphia and the surrounding area. This is just one example. There are countless more around the world. It's rendering coastal regions unfit for agriculture. It's infiltrating drinking water. The tip of the iceberg in this headline from phys.org. Saltwater will taint 77% of coastal aquifers by century's end, modeling study finds. No need to worry about that because we will never, ever make it anywhere near that far. Current trajectory, 2030 would be optimistic, short of a complete course correction. From the New York Post, U.S. to drop to 66th place in life expectancy rankings, and it's even worse for, quote, good health years. That's because of the so-called healthcare industry, or should we call it the sick care industry? From the UK Guardian, food insecurity rising because of climate breakdown. Numbers of hungry and malnourished households on the rise. Again, that's happening around the globe. What happens to countries like Haiti? We never even hear about it anymore. It's like Mad Max there, and so many countries right behind them, about 3 dozen. And nobody seems to know or care. Another from UK Guardian. The Great Abandonment. What happens to the natural world when people disappear? Question mark. Answer. Short of a complete course correction, we'll take the entire web of life down with us. And what course of action do far too many choose to take as the natural world collapses from all directions? Just take a cruise and add to the problem, while at the same time pretending it'll magically all work out. On that note, also from The Guardian, cruise ships, a license to pollute. Reports as the environmental harm caused by the shape-shifting, under-regulated cruise ship industry must be tackled. Yes, it will be. Collapse is coming. Bet on it. On last week's broadcast, I covered the massive and growing issue of electrical harmonic distortion that's wreaking havoc on power grid systems. EV charging stations, the bigger they are, like the Amazon delivery vehicle charging stations, the more chaos they are causing in the electrical grids that are already breaking down. Generators are also suffering from battery charging systems. Few are aware of this growing tidal wave of a problem, and fewer still want to talk about it, especially in the EV industry of delusion and deception. Bottom line, so-called renewable energy, which won't save us from ourselves. And no, that criticism isn't an endorsement of carbon fuels, a core component that delivered us to this dark hour, along with so many shocking aspects of so-called human nature, with far too many all too willing to actively or passively participate in the collective insanity, so long as doing so keeps their personal paradigm going for a bit longer. To any that are pondering a last-hour decision to dedicate themselves to making a difference for the better, do it now. You'll never regret such a decision. Don't take your last breath knowing that you should have, could have done something, but didn't. It's never too late to try. Back to the power problems from CNBC. Data centers powering artificial intelligence could use more electricity than entire cities. The report states the electricity consumption of data centers has exploded along with their increasingly critical role in the economy. Renewable energy alone won't be sufficient to meet their power needs. Just went over that. Regardless of where the power comes from, data centers are now at a scale where they have started tapping out against the existing utility infrastructure. A gigawatt-sized data center campus running at even the lower end of the peak demand is still roughly comparable to about 330 households or a city of more than 800,000 people, about the population of San Francisco. How long does anyone rationally think this paradigm can continue? Let's add this from medium.com, a practical guide to money during collapse. No need to continue with that report. The endless record highs in the Ponzi scheme public pacification stock market house of cards will soon enough crash with blinding speed. Count on it. Answer, put your money to good use before collapse, not just for yourself and for your family, but for any others, if you can. Both human and the fighting to survive wildlife that you're able to help. From the homeless, struggling to survive through increasingly harsh conditions, record heat and UV radiation, to deluge and chemical cold, and the countless forms of completely innocent wildlife. What have they done to deserve any of this? 200 to 300 forms of plant, animal, and insect are going extinct every single day, many forms of which have never even been scientifically identified, and they're now gone. Let's add this from environmentalist Jane Goodall. How could we ever have believed that it was a good idea to grow our food from poisons? And that's exactly what's taking place. Not to mention the ubiquitous planetary contamination from climate engineering fallout. Changing gears to some degree, as biosphere collapse unfolds and accelerates, making the controllers more desperate and dangerous than ever before, how many stop to wonder what the hundreds of biolabs around the world are up to? First, from the UK Guardian, unprecedented risk to life on Earth. Scientists call for a halt on mirror life microbe research. Experts warn that the mirror bacteria constructed from the mirror images of molecules found in nature could put humans and animals and plants at risk of lethal infection. Who would have thought? From Johns Hopkins School of Public Health, avian influenza in dairy cows, poultry, and humans. Again, what are all those biolabs up to, and who do you think they serve? From NPR, bird flu fears are intensifying. From the University of Colorado, bird flu outbreak very concerning as influenza season wraps up. OROV virus outbreak in Cuba. From EnglishNews.cn, Zambia to roll out oral cholera vaccine distribution in hotspots that are now occurring there. From Mongabay.com, studies link stronger dengue outbreak in Bangladesh to climate change. Let's stop there. Never mind the tens of millions of tons of nanoparticles being dispersed into our skies annually. Never mind the hundreds of biolabs around the globe. Never mind that lab testing has confirmed biological carrier platform particles are in our rain, polymer fibers and graphene. Nothing to see here or in our skies. Move on. Go shopping. Take a cruise. That's what the controllers want us to do until the moment of impact. One more on the subject of poisons and pathogens from the economictimes.com. Amid bleeding eye virus scare, mystery disease with flu-like symptoms kills almost 150 in Africa and sparks pandemic fears coming from every imaginable direction. Again, what are those biolabs all over the globe doing? You decide. I have to stop there because I'm almost out of time, but here's the bottom line. As climate and ecological collapse unfolds, rendering the current loot, plunder, pillage, and pollute paradigm no longer sustainable, the controllers will play ever larger cards. False flag events, pathogen release, global conflict, chaos, and carnage. The party is just getting started. Question. How many continue to blindly wave their flags without any true comprehension of what they represent? From Hannah Arendt. Tribal nationalism always insists that its own people are surrounded by, quote, a world of enemies, one against all, and that a fundamental difference exists between this people and all others. It claims its people to be unique, individual, incompatible with others, and denies theoretically the very possibility of a common mankind, long before it is used to destroy the humanity of man. Such has been the path on which we have now reached this dark crossroad. How effectively corporate media pushes the propaganda that the military and weapons industries are just, quote, defending freedom and democracy around the world. At the point of a gun, of course. Stripping foreign lands of their resources and leaving them in ruin. So much for spreading freedom and democracy. This is not what empires do. Where is consciousness? Another nugget from Hannah Arendt. This inability to think created the possibility for many ordinary men to commit evil deeds on a colossal scale, the like of which has never been seen before. The manifestation of the wind of thought is not knowledge, but rather the ability to tell right from wrong and beautiful from ugly. Scripted political theater is nothing more than controller-designed distraction. Now is when we must decide what we are made of and why we are here. Truly unshakable solace can only be found by summoning the courage and determination to face the gathering storm head on. The most important leap we can make in the right direction at this late hour is to expose and halt the climate engineering operations. If we can do that, and thus allow the planet to respond on its own to the damage already done, we could buy time to then face other converging challenges and catastrophes. It's imperative to properly prioritize. It's imperative to make every day count. Check the activist suggestions link on the homepage of geoengineeringwatch.org for specific instructions on how you can help to move this fight forward. If we do not take action today, we won't have tomorrow. Make your voice heard while you yet can. Until next week, this is Dane Wigington from geoengineeringwatch.org.